Welcome to the Gibbons Talks Boxing YouTube channel. Subscribe if you have not done so already. And tonight we're going to be talking all about the heavyweights. I'm sure many of you recognize the handsome chap on the screen with me, Richie Garner, boxing promoter, manager, and a go-to guy in Welsh boxing. Based on a conversation myself and Richie had on Twitter fairly recently, we were debating the merits of various heavyweights and their position in history. So we thought we'd do a top 10 heavyweight boxers of all time list. It's not as easy as it sounds. So the way it's going to work is each of us are going to name our boxers, our top 10 in reverse order, 10 down to 1. We're briefly going to explain why they're in that position, and we'll take it from there. And at the end, if there's any based on both our opinions, if there's any changes, we'll admit we are wrong and perhaps knock a boxer up a couple of places or knock them down, depending on the various opinions. So, Rich, as the guest, you can kick things off. Who's your number 10 heavyweight of all time?
First of all, Ciaran, thank you very much for inviting me on and obviously wanting to have me share my opinion. You said we'd last about an hour doing this, so given that I'm here, it might very well be.
But that's why I said briefly. Explain briefly.
No issues with talking, such as is the nature of my job. Obviously, I'm paid to stand on my feet and talk all. But starting at number 10, cutting to the chase. What I was looking at, and do you know what? As you said, this is such a hard list to compile, and to put it in order was even harder. But number 10 is Joe Frazier, and I mean, Joe obviously fought in an era which was a golden age, probably the golden age in heavyweight boxing, in my opinion. I think the 90s was an absolutely fantastic age for boxing, for heavyweight boxing in particular, and especially the super middles. But as far as heavyweight boxing goes, I think that the 70s is pretty much unparalleled. Obviously, Joe featured massively, featured so heavily in relation to the caliber of opponents that he fought. And bear in mind as well, I mean, Joe had a natural disability, and to go through life with a natural disability such as he did, and still be able to compete at the highest level against the opposition that he did, I think he definitely is worthy of getting into the top 10. If for those who aren't familiar, and I am a little bit of a boxing nerd, I read a tremendous amount of books on boxing and people like that. I've read Frazier's biography. He puts his injury down. He was never able to fully extend his left arm, and that's why he led quite a lot with a left hook rather than a left jab. And I think it was due to a thresher incident where he was working on farms, etc. He's a bit of a country boy, Joe, and in relation to Ali, he was more of a city boy. I think Joe definitely had advantage taken of him because he wasn't the character that Muhammad Ali was. And despite the fact that, I'm not going to say he was camera shy, but despite the fact that obviously he didn't have Ali's charisma, despite the fact that perhaps he didn't have his natural ability in front of the camera, despite the fact that he couldn't even fully extend that left arm, to hang in there with the best of them in a golden era of heavyweights, to break the champ's jaw, to extend him, to have to be pulled out, when it was literally life or death by his trainer, Eddie Futch. I think he just about sneaks into the top 10 for me.
Okay, just a couple of points on that, Rich. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely got Frazier in my top 10, a little bit higher than you. One thing is, like you mentioned there, the contrast of the different personalities between Frazier and Ali. They were perfect dance partners for each other. But it's a bit unfortunate, I think, that Ali was seen as the hero of the black people at the time, which he probably was. But Frazier unfairly was cast as the Uncle Tom, to use a phrase, of Ali at the time. And I do feel that Ali, even though he was a hero of mine, he did treat Joe Frazier very unfairly. And Frazier got a lot of stick, and unfairly, I think, because of Muhammad Ali. And I think Ali actually did apologise because of it.
As well he should. I remember reading a story as part of his book, I think, about the time when Ali was inactive, and obviously Frazier was, in his pomp, and Ali's car had broken down roadside, and Frazier had actually stopped to pick him up, despite the fact that Ali had said some really, really unsavoury things about him, all along the same sort of lines as the issues that you've touched upon. And that demonstrates to me the strength of the man's character, that he was willing to put that aside and, assist somebody who was in need of, help, who was down on their luck, not just in relation to the car, because I think Ali was really struggling for money at the time. He'd been inactive because of his wish to abstain from assisting America in the Vietnam War. And, for Joe to even pull a car over and help him out, in relation to some of the comments he'd made verbally within, the press at the time, I think showed a real strength of character, which, to be honest with you, I'm not sure Ali would have had that strength of character were the roles reversed.
No. Right, moving on. My number 10. This is going to be controversial, and for the people who do watch it, I don't know many people will watch this, but I probably get some stick for this. I got Mike Tyson as number 10. I find it difficult to place Tyson because a number of reasons. His prime was very short. The guys he beat weren't especially good. But on the plus side, he was amazingly exciting. He was an icon and still is an icon of boxing. He won the world heavyweight title at 20 years old. He was undisputed champion at 21 years old. And he also won, if it means anything to anyone or people, he was the Ring Magazine or Linear champion, whatever you want to call it, when he beat Michael Spinks. When I actually did this list maybe 10 years ago, I didn't have Mike Tyson in the list. And I tried to find my old list, but I couldn't find it. But I can't remember who I put in then instead of Tyson. But I don't know whether maybe, I know some people, I think, rate him too highly just because they confuse excitement with greatness. And then there's other people maybe who go too far the other way. And you've got to appreciate at 20 years old becoming world heavyweight champion, even though the heavyweight title at the time was fragmented as 3 champions at the time, 4 if you include Spinks. But still, what an amazing achievement. 20 years old, 5 months to be world heavyweight champion.
I'm actually not sure I agree, not with respect to him not making the top 10, because I debated very hard about whether he should make the top 10. What I disagree with is when you talk about the quality of opponents that he faced. I mean, just looking through BoxRec now in relation to the quality of opponents that he faced. And I mean, even early on in his career, I mean, don't get me wrong, he started out against Hector Mercedes, who, wasn't a great fighter. And then we've got, a string of guys who weren't great. But even, we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 4th and 5th fights, he was fighting guys with an unbeaten record. 7th fight, unbeaten record. We were looking at Michael Johnson then, who was about 8th, who had a decent enough record. Donnie Long then, 15-3, when, Mike was like 9th fight.
Yeah, when I say about the record, I more mean the record of guys, once he won the title, then the guys, he didn't fight, you just mentioned Joe Fraser as your number 10, he didn't fight anyone near the caliber of guys of Fraser. And one reason, for me anyway, that Tyson, he was never able to turn a fight around. Whenever he was losing a fight, you always lost. And also, what slightly, perhaps I'm being a bit harsh, but the fact that was in 96 or 97, whenever it was, he took step-aside money and give up the WBC world title rather than face Lennox Lewis. If you remember, he gave up the WBC title and fought Bruce Seldon instead for the WBA title. So the fact that you're willing to just take money, I mean, I'm guessing it might have been Don King's decision, and Tyson at the time probably wasn't in a particularly great place emotionally, but
I think the level of opposition he fought, and the Tyson of the 80s and the Tyson of the 90s are two very different fighters. And I mean, even coming through, before the titles and stuff like that, I think he did fight quite a high caliber of opponents. Ultimately, he did fight a high caliber of opponents. I mean, the likes of Bruce Seldon, etc. I mean, bear in mind, Seldon on paper didn't look like a bad fighter. And then he did what a lot of other fighters have done when faced with the proposition of fighting Mike Tyson. And, with the greatest of respect, he just swallowed it on the night. He just choked on the night. And, he turned from somebody who was a half-decent fighter to just, a big, stiff heavyweight who was there to be punched around the ring. And, that had as much to do with Mike's the enigma that was Mike Tyson, and the question marks over his power and how people will cope with that. And people just had no belief in themselves. You watch a highlight reel, and then if you put a pair of gloves on any guy, any heavyweight at the time, and said, right, now you're going to fight that guy, I think, you know, you could forgive them for freezing when the cameras were on them, and you know, you got that animal coming at you with those left rights, and particularly a very nasty uppercut that he had. You know,
just sorry to jump in there, Rich, just so we can move things on, because there are potentially, we've got 20 boxers we've got to talk about here, and I'm sure you've got work tomorrow morning. Just one fight I'd ask people to watch, a Mike Tyson fight, which I guess overlooked, is his fight with James Tillis.
Yeah.
People forget now that if Mike Tyson hadn't have scored a knockdown in round, I think it was round 4 or round 3, that fight would have been probably a draw on the scorecards, a 10-round draw. Right, okay, Rich, your 9th best heavyweight of all time.
Number 9 goes to George Foreman. He goes in ahead of Fraser. And listen, we all know in advance Ali has got to make this list. He's got to make anybody's list. So you've got Ali, Fraser, and Foreman all within this list. And what puts him behind Ali was obviously his loss to Ali. What puts him ahead of Fraser was the caliber of his opponents, the manner that he came back from adversity. And not only that, but obviously his comeback, which resulted in him regaining the title against a very, very tough and able Mike Mora. The fact that he was able to come back when he did is testament to his durability as much as anything else, and his punch power. And he demonstrated that if you've got punch power and durability, then you can make it in the heavyweights. And, you know, he retained that right through to his mid-40s. He fought a great caliber of opponent all the way through. He didn't duck anybody. He was quite happy to fight anybody that came along. As a young man, you know, he was feared, and as an old man, he was avoided. Which, you know, in his 40s is incredible when you think about it. And I can't think of another heavyweight who could possibly maintain that longevity. So he goes in there at number 9.
Yeah, it's interesting with Foreman. Of course, I got Foreman on my list again, a little bit higher than you. But Foreman, the young Foreman, was probably a little bit too rash, and he rushed in a little bit too much. And of course, older Foreman, well, he was in his mid-40s, so obviously he's going to be a little bit slower, a little bit more conservative. But imagine if George Foreman, the younger version, had been able to be a little bit more laid back, used his jab a bit more, been a little bit more patient, like the old Foreman of the 90s. What a fighter he would have been.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with all those points. You know, and I mean, you know, 81 fights, 25 losses, and with the caliber of opponent that he mixed with. I mean, you know, heavyweights of today, there's not many that you can point at, and you know, we can talk about Fury, we can talk about Joshua. There's, you know, we are never ever going to consider them to have taken on the quality of opponents that George Foreman did, and that's no disrespect to them, and it's not their fault, because quite simply the caliber of opponents that were around in the 2 eras that Foreman competed in, you know, they're just not there for these new age fighters such as they were for the likes of Foreman. You know, but you know, Christ. 86 fights, 5 losses with the caliber of opponents he mixed with. You know, absolutely incredible fight there.
My number 9, again, this was a difficult pick. It could have easily been, I could have swapped these round. 8 for me, 8, 9, and 10 could easily be swapped round. My number 9, Rocky Marciano. Difficult to pick. He was unbeaten, to go 49 fights unbeaten, even though apparently there might have been an early fight right at the start of his career, which was a loss that got sort of wiped off the records.
But his fights, reportedly, wasn't it?
Say it again, sorry.
It was in one of his first 3 fights, I think.
Yeah, one of his early fights, yeah, apparently. But I remember reading something about it. I should have checked up on it actually for this, but I didn't. But, you know, 49 fights unbeaten, considering he was such a small guy, even by the standards of his day. I mean, by today's standards, he's tiny. I think he had six, 7 title defenses, beat a decent level of opponent. He was able to come back from being behind on the scorecards a number of times. You know, and one thing I like about Rocky Marciano, not that it actually does him puts him high on this list, is the fact that he got out of boxing at the right time, with his money, with his faculties, and he didn't make any comeback.
No. And you know, ultimately, from what I've read, his precociousness with his money might very well have been partially to blame for his death.
Yeah.
You know, but ultimately, he makes my list later on, a lot higher than yours, for many of the reasons you've given. and definitely deserves, in my opinion, to be in the top 10.
Yeah. It was with Marciano, it's difficult because at his time there wasn't a great deal of challenges out there for him, and you can only basically fight the guys who were around at your time.
Yeah.
So moving on, Rich, you're number 8.
Jack Johnson.
Okay.
First African American world heavyweight boxing champion. Marginalized, very badly treated, and perhaps ultimately, a lot of people might put him a lot higher in this list. But it's very difficult to judge him purely because of the lack of material in order to, kind of correctly judge him. But, the archive material I've seen, love the way he fights, love the way he mixed it up. Again, the talent pool back in those days, perhaps not as rich as it might have been in other eras, but absolutely fantastic fighter, massively marginalized, treated very badly in a time when black fighters were treated that way and could be marginalized, but overcame the odds to achieve all of the things that he did.
And you mentioned his style there. He actually fights more like a modern day heavyweight in that he didn't rush in the way a lot of the guys from the early fight films. I mean, it is difficult to watch the early fight films, but they seem to be rush in, throw a few punches, hold, maul, whereas Johnson seemed to pot shot a bit, step back, look for counter shots. And as it happens, I'll tell you now, my number 8 is also Jack Johnson.
Oh, wow. There we go.
So there we go. If this was a TV show now, we'd have some sort of stars and a sort of snap type thing would pop up. But the only thing that people, perhaps Johnson would have been higher on my list if it wasn't for the fact that he, even though he was a victim of his colour, being black, he also drew the colour bar himself by refusing to fight Sam Langford. Simply because in Jack Johnson's own opinion, so he says, or so it's been said, that there was no money in it for him to fight a fellow black man.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
So, but of course, Langford's an amazing fighter as well, and of course, Johnson definitely didn't want to lose the title. So, make of that what you will. Your number 7, Rich?
Number 7, Evander Holyfield. Obviously started out a cruiserweight. I've read his book. I've also read Lou Duber's book, and he talks a lot about Evander. He put a lot of time, effort, and a lot of money into Evander Holyfield, which, when at the time the US Olympic team had a tremendous amount of stars, there were other options there for him. He talked about Evander's lack of punch power, lack of belief in himself at times, which, when you consider it, is incredible. I mean, my memories of Evander Holyfield in the 90s were watching him, go to the ring with a gospel choir behind him, singing about God, and his total faith in himself through God is one of the enduring memories of my watching him come into the ring. It just seemed like he was completely fearless, and of course he showed that against Mike Tyson. To move up from cruiserweight to heavyweight, and transfer that natural ability to the heavyweight scene. I mean, he literally ducked nobody, and his 3 fights with Bowe will go down in legend, and quite possibly it's the greatest trilogy, in my opinion, of heavyweight boxing throughout history. Incredible, and not just in relation to the fights. I mean, everything happened in those fights. I mean, we had guys ring on wind machines. We had. I mean, when you fight Bowe, it's so unpredictable. Anything could have happened anyway. I mean, I remember, I think it was Lou. Was it Lou Duber who actually had a heart attack ringside?
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, in the rematch. Yeah.
Where there was a massive fight. I mean, they were very exciting spectacles. They were exceptionally well promoted. Holyfield, he fought Lewis, he fought Tyson twice. He fought Bowe 3 times.
Foreman
didn't fight. Yeah, there was nobody he didn't fight. And even the likes of Alex Stewart, Jesse Ferguson, who incidentally he had life and death with. And let's not forget that he came back from adversity, and so much as they said that he shouldn't be boxing. He had problems with his heart. I think at one point they said he had a hole in his heart or something like that. Claimed to have been faith healed, and made that terrific comeback. I mean, he kind of is Mr. Heavyweight Boxing really of the 90s, and his performances were only really outdone by his faith, and the way he carried himself, way he conducted himself, absolutely deserves to make it to number 7. Are we at?
Yeah, 7. Yeah.
So yeah, my number 7, Evander Holyfield.
Yeah, it's interesting with Holyfield as well. I remember I used to buy all the old American boxing magazines. Of course, back in the day, we had no internet just to jump. So it was basically I used to buy the Ring magazine, KO, Boxing Illustrated, all the British magazines as well. But it was really only after the rematch with Riddick Bowe, when he beat him in the rematch, that Holyfield actually started being considered a true heavyweight. So even though he had good wins, no, he had an excellent first fight with Bowe, which he lost. He'd already beaten Larry Holmes, washed up old Larry Holmes, and he'd already beaten Foreman. But really, up until that point, he still wasn't really considered a true heavyweight. He was considered a blown-up heavyweight. And I mean, Holyfield's on my list as well, but it would be slightly further up. My number 7, already mentioned him, Joe Frazier, for all the reasons you mentioned. I mean, just beating Muhammad Ali puts him at number 7 for me. I mean, like we said, he's fought in the toughest period, the toughest decade of heavyweight boxing ever for all the guys you mentioned and all the names you mentioned. So I won't go back over them. Your number 6, Rich?
Number 6, Lennox Lewis. I think obviously he edges Holyfield. Fought everybody. The 2 losses. Was it 2? I think he had 2 losses.
Rahman and McCall.
Avenged both of those losses in spectacular fashion. Although the McCall victory, I think, was undermined somewhat by McCall's mental difficulties he was having at the time. Although, to be fair, I don't think McCall was perhaps not experiencing those mental difficulties in the first fight. But obviously, both of those fights, he gets stopped, 1-punch knockouts. I mean, in the heavyweights, that could happen to anybody. He had an extended career, and with the exception of 2 1-punch knockouts, of which he reversed, Lewis beat all the guys and really dangerous guys. I think one of the most dangerous guys who is never going to make a top 10 list of all-time heavyweights that he beat, and one of his best fights, one of Lewis's best fights, was against Ray Mercer. Absolutely tremendous. Yeah. And people talk about Lewis's chin at the time and how chinny he was. I never felt Lewis was chinny at all. And that fight with Lennox Lewis against Ray Mercer really demonstrated that. And if you need a demonstration of how to live up to his name, Merciless Ray Mercer could be, you just have to watch his fight with Tommy Morrison, which is, on everybody's heavyweight highlight reel of knockouts. It was absolutely brutal. Crikey.
Just to bring you back to Mercer and Lennox Lewis, Rich. Who do you think actually won that fight?
Oh, I had Lewis winning that by 2 or 3, if I remember correctly. At the time I watched it live. But Mercer, he took him to the well. Mercer was absolutely, one of the most underrated fighters. And the only reason I think he didn't take it a step further was because he had terrible problems with a back injury. And I think he had problems in relation to getting out on the roads and running.
And Mercer was a small heavyweight as well. If I remember rightly, when Lewis won the gold in the Olympics, I think Mercer won the gold in the heavyweight division.
Yeah.
Whereas Lewis was the super heavyweight in the amateurs.
And I mean, when you look at Lewis's record, he just fought everybody. I mean, and not only that, but he fought fighters that people were afraid to fight. Donovan Razor Ruddock. Everybody. Lewis took him on quite early in his career. Everyone's, oh, this is a mistake. This guy's had life and death with Tyson. He's hurt Tyson. Donovan Razor Ruddock at the time, massively touted as, I wouldn't even call him a gatekeeper. He was a contender. But he was one of the most avoided fighters, and Lewis just disposed of him so easily. He just made it look easy. I mean, even guys like Tony Tucker, I think he stopped Tucker in the first or second round. I mean, Tucker was...
Lewis.
Yeah.
No, he points to Tony Tucker, and he dropped him in the second or third, I think.
Okay.
But he went the distance in the end.
Yeah, I remember him going down. And at the time, was that the first time Tucker had been down, or he'd only been knocked out?
I don't remember if it's the first time he's down, but I know Lewis dropped him early on, and I think he may have dropped him late on and went to points. So that was his first defense when he had the title off. He was awarded the title when Riddick Bowe pinned the WBC belt.
But Tucker had mixed it with the likes of Tyson, really big punches. And Lewis had. I remember him being dropped. I thought he'd stopped him, but my memory lets me down there. But I mean, he was a terrific puncher, Lewis, especially with that overhand right. He beat Bruno convincingly. I say that with a cheeky grin because obviously it was in Cardiff, and it was one of the first massive fights in Cardiff. And, Bruno really took him well. And I think that Bruno was massively underrated. Everybody who's fought Bruno said that his jab was surprisingly quick and one of the, most fierce jabs that they faced. But Lewis, you look at his resume, you look at his CV, and, what an absolutely fantastic fighter. And I think he got out of the game at the right time. He had a very difficult fight against Vitaly Klitschko, who I think is the most talented of the two brothers, and is again another heavyweight who suffered as a result of bad back, I understand, and made the decision to retire early. But Vitaly, I think, was a bit tougher than Vladimir. And, he again showed the grit and determination and the chin that Lewis has got. And Lewis demonstrated in return the firepower that he had, the arsenal that he had in, damaging Vitaly's face so badly. I mean, fair play to Vitaly, he wanted to go on, but good Lord, nobody was going to let that happen given what Lewis did to him. So I think he deserves the spot that I've given him there. And I think he's probably, the greatest heavyweight champion to come out of Britain.
Yeah, it's interesting with Lewis as well. After the loss to McCall, he was trained by Pepe Craner at that point. Yeah. And I think it was after that fight he went to Emmanuel Stewart, wasn't it? And he was almost, the way Emmanuel Stewart transformed him as a fighter and made him fight to his strengths was it was impressive how Lewis just did. I know he used to always say it all the time. He was like a fine wine. He got better with age. It was one of his cliches he'd always use.
It was no good for him. I mean, he was, he's borderline a cheerleader. And the books that I read afterwards in relation to the, how unprofessional Correa was, in relation to his preparation, in relation to how he worked with Lewis. And I think at the time Lewis was having his ego massage, and he rather enjoyed it as a young man, but realised he wanted to stay at the top of the game. Things were going to have to change. And he went to quite possibly the greatest trainer. And I mean, crikey, we could do a top 10 of trainers on a program like this, and I think Lewis at the time, he chose the right man for the job. Holyfield, himself was trained by him for a little while, I think, and he had some tremendous talent, to come out of the Kronk gym. But I mean, when he was alive, and I think he died at a very young age, Emmanuel Stewart. It was always a dream of mine. If ever I won the lottery, that I would go to the Kronk gym and train and pay a fortune to have his undivided attention, because I admired him so much. He was always so calm in the corner, and the advice that he gave always seemed to be bang on point. And, he really developed Lewis at a time when he needed that. And, that's testament as well to the people that were around Lewis, making, the right decisions with him in order to push his career in the right direction.
Yeah. My number 6, already be mentioned, George Foreman, for all the reasons we both spoke about. He's just 2-time world champion in the 70s and the 90s. Was 94 he beat Michael Mora. Your number 5, Rich?
Number 5, and we're getting to the top end. We're getting serious now.
Top end of the top 10.
Joe Louis, the Brown Bomber.
Oh, okay.
12 years.
12 years world champion.
I mean, I think I've said enough there, haven't I? 12 years undisputed, 25 consecutive defenses, Ring Magazine's top 100 punches, absolutely incredible fighter, historical figure, absolutely incredible fighter, well deserves to be in the top 5 given what he left behind. And bear in mind as well, you touched on this before, not exceptionally big, 6'2", when you consider today's heavyweights. I mean, at the time, that was reasonably big, but when you consider, today's heavyweights, that's quite small, really. And a record of 69 fights, 66 wins.
I haven't got the record to hand. I should have got it, but
3 losses, 25 defenses, 12 years undisputed champion. He well deserves to be very much high up in the list.
When I was actually looking through some stats earlier, and one thing that stood out with Joe Louis was in 1941 he made 7 title defenses alone, just in that 1 year. Considering these days top fighters only fight maybe once, twice a year, like people are all excited now because Canelo might be fighting 3 times this year. Joe Louis fought 7 times just in 1941.
I can't get prospects out 7 times in a year.
But of course, something I think I'm probably guilty of as well, and probably I'm guessing most people in boxing or boxing media or whatever. Joe Louis was the founding member of the Bum of the Month Club,
I
where he fought lesser opponents in title offences.
Yeah, I wondered if you might mention that. It's gone down in boxing history, that that adage, isn't it? And I think his reputation suffered a little bit because of that. But ultimately, you can't get around the facts and figures. And 12 years undisputed. I mean, 12 years.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I don't mind as long as you fight in the top contenders. I don't mind if you have an easy fight in between. I mean, that goes for even now. I got no problem with Canelo having an easy fight next, as long as he fights the big fights as well. So, yeah, I mean, Joe Lewis, what a fighter! 12 years as the champion. That's if he won the world title now, he'd still be world champion in what would be 2032 or 33 or something.
Yeah,
on that basis. Yeah, amazing. And also as well, he was actually world champion after the United States joined the Second World War. So his career was slightly. He still fought during the Second World War, defended his title a few times, but certainly a number of fights he had slowed down. So if it wasn't for the Second World War, there's a good chance he could have had up to 30 title defences.
Yeah.
My number 5, Vander Holyfield. Modern day great cruiserweight, possibly the greatest cruiserweight ever. A great heavyweight as well. Probably only got, sad again, the respect he deserved after the second Bow fight, and what a fighter for all the reasons we've mentioned. Your number 4, Rich?
Muhammad Ali.
Wow. Right. I'm going to turn this off now. Let me just turn this interview off now.
He's lucky he made in the top 10, Ciaran. Listen, why does Muhammad Ali, why does he only feature at number 4? Well, quite simply because I think the 3 ahead of him have got different qualities. They offer different things, and he somewhat tarnished his legacy by going on way too long. We know that. We know that he went on too long, and he missed a section of his career out by not wanting to go to the Vietnam War. He struggled with Joe Frazier. There were fighters he struggled with. I could say a million things about Muhammad Ali that were negative. I'm not going to be popularized by any of these things. I actually think he was a really dirty fighter. I think as a human being, given what he did to Joe Frazier, given the things that he said about people, given how he leaned on race to marginalize even other black men, I think he was an exceptionally unsavory character. It's very easy to remember the Muhammad Ali that we used to, trundle out with Parkinson's, who everybody felt a bit sorry for. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he wasn't a great. That's why, over all the period of the boxing's been in existence, that is why he makes the top 10, because he was special. But part of his charisma, part of the reason that he was special, was a lot more to do with the way that he behaved, the way that he was. And ultimately, I found a lot of it a little bit distasteful. The way he treated Frazier, the way he treated...
but surely, if you're making judging people on where they are in the top 10, it's got to be on who you fight and who you beat, and and I know maybe not personality outside the ring.
And that is another reason, not just about personality, but another reason why he's 4, because he went on way too long. Losing to the likes of Leon Spinks, the manner in which he lost to Larry Holmes, it was over a long time before then, and he continued to trundle along, damaging his own health, and in my opinion, purely my opinion, damaging his own legacy.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, but there's very few fighters, very few heavyweights on this list that didn't fight on past their best.
Well, be my top 3 and ask.
I know. I'm trying to think who's going to pop up on this. Is Dorian Dart's going to pop on there?
Listen. Ali couldn't compete with him when it came to dark fruits. You know
this. My number 4, Lennox Lewis. Great fighter, greatest ever British fighter, European fighter. Was never really, even though he was a much better fighter in Britain, he was never able to get out of Bruno's shadow to a certain extent. despite all his great achievements, Frank Bruno was always the presence of Bruno was always there. I mean, I was there that night in Cardiff, and
Have you got Bruno at 3 then?
Say it again.
Have you got Bruno at 3 then?
Well, I'm thinking you might have, Rich, if you got the. No, but yeah, I mean, great fighter. Was beaten every man he stepped in the ring with. Was able to make adjustments in and out of the ring.
Absolutely huge fan of Lewis. I love the way he utilised the jab. He had he had a hurtful jab. Even when he threw it, extending it, so he only pushed it 6 inches, you could tell he was still causing a tremendous amount of damage. Incredible jab, incredible hand speed. That overhand right was lovely. And towards the end of his career, he started utilising the uppercut as well. And, you know, especially against the smaller fighters like Tommy Morrison, David Tua, people like that.
And the uppercut again against Klitschko, his last fight. He almost decapitated Klitschko with the uppercut in, was it around 3 or 4?
And he seemed to be a really nice guy as well. I mean, even when he was involved in that row with Bo, and there was a funny moment when Bo, I remember this quite distinctly, when Lewis was ringside and commentating for one of the...
I know you're on about, yeah.
And Bo came ringside and they had a bit of a, you know, face-to-face. And Bo was, you know, wasn't a particularly nice man, I don't think. And, you know, he said some choice things. But Lewis didn't really get nastily involved. When he fought Tyson went for him, bit his leg. And, you know, I just felt that, you know, he dealt with all those issues really, really well. He's always very composed, always very calm. You know, he lived by that chess player kind of charisma, and, you know, he personified that, you know, sort of quiet calmness.
Just so I know the incident you're talking about, and you've been very diplomatic about what Riddick Bowe said to Lewis. I presume it was when he called him a faggot, which as we know now is like an American sort of slur, homosexual slur. But back in those days, in the early 90s, I don't think people in Britain weren't quite so clued up on things, and people were sort of asking why is Riddick Bowe calling Lennox Lewis a meaty dish you have with peas and gravy sometimes. But Lewis maintained his dignity very well in that period, I think.
Oh, totally. You know, in every aspect of everything he did. Like I said, when Tyson attacked him at the press conference and was biting his leg, you know, everything he did with a calm dignity, which, you know, made me respect him even more. And at the time, I mean, I was boxing during these sorts of days, and you know, I used to look up to Lennox and, you know, the style of his fighting. And there were a lot of people, you know, even in my gym, who doubted him and, you know, he's not the real deal. He's not the real deal. I always felt that Lennox was a real deal. I always felt that he would go down as an all-time great. You know, there were all kinds of question marks over what happened between him and Tyson in sparring. And Lennox always maintained that he, not that he necessarily dominated, but that he more than held his own, and that if they ever meet in a professional ring, you know, again, he personified that coolness, that calmness. And he always said that, you know, he would take Tyson out. And of course he did. Maybe not the best Mike Tyson, but, you know, on that performance, I think he probably would have taken out any Mike Tyson.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Right. The top 3, Rich, your number 3. This gets interesting.
Top 3, Gene Tunney.
Wow.
First, not just in relation to his boxing ability, but I like the way Gene Tunney fought, and he was, he really was somebody who changed boxing somewhat, because at the time they would stand toe to toe and they'd slug away, and Tunney was a boxer puncher, and he was massively criticised for changing boxing in some ways. He was a pioneer, and, you know, he really changed the way people thought about boxing, and at the time was criticised for it. Bear in mind, he beat Jack Dempsey twice, and he received the first $1 million purse in boxing. In many ways, he changed boxing, but it's not just about that. As you've said, it's also about fighting styles, caliber of opponents. For me, Tunney was a complete package. He got in and out, and I love the way that Tunney controls the fight from the pocket. He decides, and this is what I tell all my fighters when I'm training them, you know, 90% of this, in my mind, when you are fighting somebody, is about controlling the pocket. You decide when to engage. You decide when you want to be in the pocket. You decide when you want to be out of the pocket. And I think Gene Tunney controlled so many of his opponents with his fantastic footwork, underrated punch power, and his general ability at a time when boxers are just expected to stand toe to toe for however many rounds and just beat the crap out of each other.
Yeah.
And each with
Yeah, I think it's difficult in judging guys like Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey and Jack Johnson, we've already mentioned, because the film footage is not the best quality. So that's why I always find it difficult looking at guys like that. But yeah, Gene Tunney, he actually used to be on my old list from what I can remember. But yeah, he hasn't made the cut this time. I think Tyson's actually bumped him off. But
I really like the way Tunney moves for that era. I think he was way ahead of his time.
And interesting, the rematch with Jack Dempsey was a 10-round fight, I believe. Am I right in saying? Rather than
and earlier on in his career as well. Sorry, because I'm just digressing a little bit. We talked about the size of modern day heavyweights and stuff like that. During the course of one of these fights, I think he weighed in at something like 168.
Yeah,
ridiculous. He was a small fighter.
And he was considered quite cultured as well, wasn't he? He was well read. He had a decent education by most boxer standards. And I think Jack Dempsey was the working man, whereas Gene Tunney was a bit like Fraser and Ali, where they were portrayed by the media anyway as direct opposites.
Yeah.
A fresh name to the list hasn't been mentioned already, I don't think. Larry Holmes is my number 3.
Oh, Eastern Assassin.
Assassin, best job in heavyweight history, in my opinion. Had some excellent wins. His win over Ken Norton, probably one of the greatest ever heavyweight fights. I mean, if you're just watching this and you got 5 minutes, just watch round 15 of that fight, if nothing else. Had a string of good defenses, beat Jerry Cooney, Mike Weaver, Shavers. Of course, he beat a shell of Muhammad Ali, but I think you've got to give respect to Larry Holmes. He could have made a name for himself by absolutely obliterating Muhammad Ali that night. But Larry Holmes showed his compassion and allowed Ali to go 10 rounds without seriously hurting him.
He's going in on Ali. You see some of those shots.
Oh, but yeah, but he could have knocked him out in the sort of after rounds 5 or 6. He could have taken Ali out, I think, if he really wanted to.
I don't know. I've seen that fight many times. I think he was a little bit cruel. I mean, he let Ali linger. A compassionate fighter will go to the body. He didn't go much to the body, Ciaran.
Yeah, I don't know. Perhaps I have to watch it back. But I just got the impression that Holmes, if he'd really wanted to put the pressure on, he could have stopped. He could have stopped Ali. I'm sure of that. I mean, Ali he offered literally nothing in that fight. But one thing as well, I think it's round 3 of Holmes's fight with Tyson. Holmes starts to move and starts to throw his jab out. And I think we had a tiny little glimpse there of what a fight between Holmes and Mike Tyson might have been like if Holmes had been at his best. I know it's easy to say, but I mean, Larry Holmes against Tyson, both of their best. That would have been a brilliant fight, I think.
He almost made the list ahead of Frazier.
Okay. Right.
It was a close one thing. Because and I love a fighter with a great jab. And when I'm training guys, I try to instill in them what was instilled upon in me by my trainers, which is the jab is your bread and butter. It's everything. And he had one of the greatest jabs in boxing. Yeah, and great powers of recovery as well. After Ernie Shavers dropped him. And what a fighter Shavers was, Yeah. And you know what? If this was based on the top 10 punches, Shavers would probably be in the top 3. Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. And Shavers used to work as a doorman in Liverpool as well, believe it or not. I've met Ernie. He came to Cardiff. Right. And he's still living in the UK, and what a fantastic gentleman he is. Really nice guy. Okay, the top 2, Rich. I thought before this I'd be able to guess your top 2, but you've already mentioned both of them, so I haven't got a clue where you're going to go with this. I'm guessing where one of them's going to be, but go on, number 2. There's no way you'll guess my number 1, and it's a little bit naughty of me. You're not on the list, Rich, you? Oh, Jesus. I wouldn't make the top 10 million. Your number 2? Marciano. You already mentioned him, Rocky Marciano, for all the reasons that you've given. 49-0, got out at the right time, fought people, absolute wrecking machine going forward, massive pain threshold. There was that controversy. I was going to mention it. There was that controversy over, in his first couple of fights and I think he lost one, but they put it down. If I recollect what I've read, I think they put it down to an exhibition. I think they
Right.
said, well, it's an exhibition. But just fierce, non-stop punching machine. And how can you resist a guy that finishes at the top of his game, 49-0?
Just going to pull you up on something here, Rich, for a second.
Mm-hmm.
You criticised Muhammad Ali earlier for being a dirty fighter, and there's not
Oh,
many heavyweights in heavyweight history who was dirtier than Rocky Marciano.
But nevertheless, nobody is ever saying that Marciano wasn't a dirty fighter. He was rough. He roughhoused. That was the nature of his fights. Whereas everybody reveres Ali as being this, angel, and I don't think he was.
Yeah, but in the boxing ring, I mean, we're sort of getting sidetracked here from your number 2 on your list. But in the boxing ring, Muhammad Ali, yeah, he did pull behind the head, which he shouldn't have done, and he got away with it, probably because of who he was, I'm guessing, a lot of the time. But I don't think he was dirty apart from that. Apart from the Ernie Terrell fight, in which, by his own admission, he tried to hurt Terrell in that fight. But apart from that, I don't think Ali was ever a dirty fighter.
There was another fighter. I don't think it was Terrell, but he was beating Ali. I can't remember who it was. Deliberately thumbed him in the eye. Continued to thumb him in the eye.
Was that the German? What's the guy? He beat him in the late 60s. I can't think of the name's gone. It was a German fight. I think he complained to Ali.
No, it wasn't a German fighter.
No,
black American fighter. I
right.
Genuinely who it was. It escapes me now. But he talked about Ali deliberately doing it, and in the clinches, pulling the head down and doing it, not just leading the jab and deliberately pushing the thumb in, but doing it in the clinches and recognizing that his opponent had an injury and just doing it out of spite. He was a spiteful fighter, but yeah, I mean, we digress a little bit, but yeah.
Okay, so that was your number 2. My number 2 has already been mentioned. Joe Louis, brilliant fighter. All the reasons we said: 25 title defenses, 12 years as world champion. Technically brilliant, excellent jab, picked his shots brilliantly. Had an early loss in his career to Schmeling, but was able to come back and put things right in the rematch. If you're going to be critical, I suppose one thing you could maybe say against Joe Louis, and this has been super critical, is he may be a little bit slow. His footwork might be a little bit slow. In his fight with Billy Conn, the light heavyweight, he struggled to keep up with him, but again, he eventually caught up with him, and the phrase was coined, was it, you can run but you can't hide. That apparently has been attributed to Joe Louis about that fight with Billy Conn. But yeah, Joe Louis, what a fighter. Right. Yeah. Drum roll. Brrr. Richie's number 1 heavyweight of all time is
Teofilo Stevenson.
Yeah. Okay.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
Three-time gold medalist in the Olympics. If it wasn't for Cuba and obviously the authorities pulling Cuban boxing team out of, he could have been a 5 times Olympic gold medalist. His highlight reel is incredible. If you go on YouTube and you type in his name, because of course, a lot of, with the greatest respect, this is a term that's used a lot. A lot of casuals in boxing just won't even have heard of this guy. They watch this, and they might, well, who the hell is this guy? His highlight reel, who he fought in the amateurs, knocking them out, his physique, the way he carried himself, his services to boxing, his services to Cuba afterwards. In my opinion, physically, he was the complete package, and he was a standout heavyweight. There was talk of him turning pro if he turned his back on Cuba, came to America, and they said for your first fight you can fight Ali for $1 million.
Yeah, I'm right in saying that wasn't there several attempts over the years to try and get him to turn pro, or they tried to have some sort of deal where he'd still be an amateur, but they allowed him to fight. They were just so desperate to get him to fight Ali, because of course the Cuban market in America, especially in Florida and Miami, is massive.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. When I was an amateur, I hero worshipped this guy, and trying to get footage of him was incredibly difficult. because as you say, back in the day, there were two sources really, beta and VHS. And, when beta was phased out, trying to get VHS footage of Teofilo Stevenson, exceptionally difficult, but I was aware of him, he was talked about. And, from the first time I saw him, I realized that this guy was absolutely special. Now you can get loads and loads of footage on him. I mean, he died not too long back. He was a huge character in Cuba. He was Minister for Sport for a long time. It's unfortunate that, towards the end in his 50s and 60s, Minister for Sport, blah, 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 and a huge figure in Cuba. But I understand he battled with alcoholism. He obviously had his demons, but in the ring, his footwork, his power, his physique, he was never, ever not ready for anybody. His record was outstanding. And, he didn't care who he fought. He was just one of those guys. And I mean, the Cuban boxing program is absolutely incredible. It's a way of life out there. They almost train like pros. But I mean, he took out all the top Americans. Absolutely incredible fighter. And in my opinion, although it's a little bit left of field because, of course, he never fought as a pro, I still think that he's the number one heavyweight of all time. And if he had turned pro, there's no doubt in my mind he would have gone on to be an all-time great in the pros.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to argue, really. I got to confess, I've only seen highlights of him on YouTube and the bits they show on BBC or whatever. So, I mean, I am watching an extensive amount of his fights. But what I've probably read a lot more about him than I've watched. An outstanding talent. I think Glenn McCorry was speaking somewhere, I don't know where it was, on YouTube or something, saying about what an amazing fighter he was. And I remember my uncles, who all love boxing, speaking about it as well. Yeah, but I mean, yeah. So as soon as you said the name, I thought, oh, right, yeah, that's a typical Rich to come up with something like that.
I absolutely worship the guy. Honest to God, as an amateur, I absolutely worship him. And I mean, my pride and joy. One of my friends bought me a signed photograph of Teofilos, which I keep tucked out of the way, which is a shame, really. But I'm afraid of it getting damaged. And I'd imagine it's probably worth quite a bit of money at this stage. Just what an absolute machine. He had everything. The way he moved, his reflexes. If anybody doesn't know what I'm talking about, I just urge you to look at YouTube and just have a look at this guy's natural ability. Incredible fighter.
So I know I'm putting on the spot a little bit, Rich, but is there any particular fight of his people should try and watch, or just type his name in and see what pops up?
The problem is because he the era he competed in. The problem is you will probably only ever find highlight reels as extensive fights. And most of the stuff you'll find on YouTube are mostly of him just knocking people out. But he just had that natural ability. The way he threw his punches, technically, he was in my opinion near perfect.
Okay, yeah, excellent. And one can't really argue with that. As I presume you guessed, I'm watching this guess. My number one, Muhammad Ali, for the simple reasons: 3-time world heavyweight champion. He fought in the very best era of heavyweight boxing, the 70s, and you could argue that the 60s was either the second best era or the third behind the 90s. He beat Sonny Liston, who was probably a fringe top 10 heavyweight of all time, or certainly top 15. He beat Joe Frazier twice.
Let me just cut you off there for 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Let's go. And I'm not going to be popular for saying all these things, but
No, you be you, Rich.
But boxing is subjective, okay? Let's talk about the Liston fights.
Yeah.
First fight, maybe Liston underestimated him. Second fight, what happened?
The second fight, you said, sorry?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, we all know what happened. He got caught by the phantom punch, which I think it was a punch. It did actually land, but whether it had the power to knock Liston out or not is another question. Liston, basically, in his own account, he waited for Ali, as he was then, to go to the neutral corner, which he didn't. The referee, Joe Walcott, lost control of the fight, and he basically was told by the Ring magazine editor at the time, Nat Fleischer, that he should call the fight off and award the fight to Ali?
Shrouded in controversy, which is exactly Ali's career from beginning to end, really, isn't it?
The first fight, I think the first fight, yeah, Liston did probably underestimate Ali, but even if he didn't, I'm not quite sure what. Liston was a really powerful guy, but maybe slightly slow. Was his only slightly slower foot, not his hands. He had fast hands. But I mean, but actually, to Liston's credit, I mean, Liston probably could be maybe 10 or 11 on the list, but because even after, if you look, I don't know if you got box rec on there, but even after he lost to Ali, he went on a long winning streak. I think about 10, 11 fights unbeaten. And there was talk of him going back into when Ali was had his license taken off him. There was talk of Liston going into one of the tournaments to find the new heavyweight champion, like because New York State, they had their world champion and the WBA had a separate world champion. But because of the way the Ali fight ended and his links to the mob, he was excluded. Yeah. And but anyway, you're stealing my thunder, Rich. You're stealing Muhammad Ali's thunder. So Muhammad Ali, a great victory over Sonny Liston the first time. The second time, if anything, the way it ended, it probably robbed Ali of an even more credit. Ali had a good string of victories. He beat all the best guys around in the 60s. Beat Joe Frazier, beat George Foreman, beat Ernie Shavers, even though Ali at the time was a really faded fighter. Amazing powers of recovery. There's probably not many fighters, if any fighter in history who could get up the way Ali did against Joe Frazier in that first fight, that left hook in around 15. What a brilliant punch by Frazier, and Ali was probably up even by the time Joe got to the neutral corner. And Ali got up, and actually Ali was better. He fought better after he got up after a knockdown than he did before it. And there's no other heavyweight who's beaten as many good guys as Ali. And even like second tier opponents, Ali beat them all. If you're going to be critical, I suppose you could say Ali didn't punch the body at all. He never punched the body. You could say things about him outside the ring. Perhaps it might be true. Yeah, certainly he didn't treat Joe Frazier very nicely. But in the ring, I think I'd struggle to see anyone, any professional at least, who would be better than Ali.
Yeah, well, it's a popular opinion. But I mean, for me, he tarnished that legacy of making it, inside the top three, just by going on way too long. When you look at a career, you can't just look at the highlight reel of all, the good times. I think you got to look at the career as a whole. And there were so many lows towards the end.
Well, really, the lows would have been the first Spinks fight, the Holmes fight, and the Trevor Berbick fight. And you could argue he put the Spinks fight right in the rematch. And okay, yeah, he lost to Holmes terribly, and he looked awful again against Trevor Berbick. But I think, well, obviously, it's very subjective, of course. But I think most boxers, if you judge them after their primes, would be there's very few great boxers actually be in anyone's top 10. I mean, would that affect you, how you judge, say, Sugar Ray Robinson, just for example, or Sugar Ray Leonard? I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard, of course, got knocked out by Hector Camacho as a middleweight, I think, his last fight of his career.
Do you know what? It's funny. You talk about all these fighters, and you talk about Sugar Ray Leonard there, who was an absolutely fantastic fighter, fantastic boxing ability. But it's funny to see all these guys being heralded now as these angels. And again, and I think he's actually one of Gary Lockett's favorite all-time fighters, Sugar Ray Leonard. I think Gary looked up to him a lot when he was a bit younger and stuff like that. But again, you're talking about a fighter who could be very unattractive in some of the things that he said, about things. Gifted a decision, in my opinion, against Hagler. Again, controversial. But I actually had Hagler up. And actually, I prefer a fighter. I prefer a boxer. You can tell from, Gene Tunney making it as high as he does in the list, that I really, really do respect somebody who can, move, jab and move and make people miss. And, Leonard was all about that. But, as a person, I think he was quite unattractive. Later on, have you read his book? Have you read his biography?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure what you made of that, but he makes all kinds of allegations of sexual assault and stuff about one of his early amateur trainers, but then doesn't really talk about being sexually assaulted at all. And I appreciate that might be raw for him. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but you can't open that door and say you want to release these demons and then just not really make this thing happen.
Well, just sorry to cut you off there, Rich. I think the Leonard Hagler fight is definitely another chat we've got to have on a different day. And we've got 2-3 hours spare. But just bringing it back to the heavyweights before we wrap things up. What heavyweights active today do you think might break the top 10? Or do you think any active heavyweights today will possibly break into the top 10?
No way. I unreservedly say that. No way. And when we were talking about Darren, obviously, potentially being on here with me, and I thought maybe this would be a three-way, or maybe myself in comparison with Darren, is because there was something that we said on Twitter recently, and Darren said, Tyson Fury could hang with any of the boxers, any of the heavyweight boxers from the era. Listen, I love Darren. I respect him, and he was a good pro. I like him, but there's no way. There's absolutely no way.
And sorry, go on, Richie. Go on, Ed.
And I genuinely, right, and I'll be hung for this, especially by the Tyson fanboys. Tommy Morrison would have knocked out Tyson Fury.
Okay, let's move on. Well, I got a good. I mean, Tommy Morrison was obviously a very good fighter, but let's not forget he got knocked out in one round by Michael Bent. He got badly beaten up by Joe Hip. Let me
rephrase that, because that was a bit misleading. Tommy Morrison on his best night against Tyson Fury on his best night, Tommy Morrison knocks him out. Tommy Morrison had well-publicized lifestyle issues with it, which ultimately might very well be attributed to his death. We all know this. But when Morrison was on his game, he was an underrated boxer who just had tremendous knockout power. And he went to the body well, and then he mixed it up low and high. And I genuinely think, and this will not be a popular opinion, but since when have I ever let that hold me back?
Well, I'd certainly give Tommy Morrison a shot against any of today's heavyweights. I'm not sure I'd pick him as a favourite to beat guys like Joshua or Fury, but I'd certainly give him a good shot against someone as fundamentally poor as, say, Deontay Wilder, just for example. Who are the heavyweights who just missed out on the list, Rich? Who are the guys who maybe 11, 12, 13 quickly?
Larry Holmes, very, very close, missed out on the list. There were some older fighters, guys like Sharkey, but there's really not enough archive footage, and it's so difficult. It really is tough to choose from the older fighters. And it was a different era altogether. The styles of boxing, the way that they behaved, it wasn't a sport in so much as it was just more about who was the toughest in many ways. Christ, it was so hard. The hardest part wasn't really choosing the top 10. Certainly for me, the hardest part wasn't choosing the top 3. And with Ali at number 4, I know that will grate on a lot of people. But like you said, boxing's subjective. I really, really like Tunney. There's no way, if we're choosing, just heavyweights as opposed to pro or amateur heavyweights, there's no way that anybody's ever convinced me to take Stevenson out of number 1. But the difficulty was, aside from those top 2 or 3, the difficulty was putting them in an order. The difficulty was, categorizing them from 1 to 10, because as you have done, I mean, our lists contain a lot of people, in common, but nevertheless, just in a different order. And it depends where you look for it. Depends what excites you. It's subjective. But that's what did it for me. A lot of people will disagree with that. I mean, Jesus Christ, there are people out there who will put Tyson Fury in that top 10.
There's actually, there's commentators, and well, not commentators, pundits, who even, I think it was actually on the night, you go back and watch a broadcast if you want, I'm not going to say who they are, but they were pundits on the Sky Sports broadcast saying that Anthony Joshua is one of the top 10 greatest heavyweights of all time after he beat Klitschko.
Let me tell you something now, right? You can't expect me to come on here with you and let it all hang out and say all these controversial things, then not start naming names. Seriously, you've got to grow up here. You've got to be on the dark side with me.
Well, it's not for me to out anybody, but the broadcast is there if people want to watch it. I'm not sure if Sky have cut those bits out at the end, but yeah. Well, anyway, Rich, it's been really good to talk to you. Really enjoyed the chat. It's really interesting to hear some of your views. No, it's been really good, mate. It's been good. No, it's just interesting how different people, it's not a black and white thing, how you pick what you like. And I suppose that's why I guess boxing's such a subjective sport, in the way even how you decide a winner on a 12-round fight or a 10-round fight. Because people just like different things, they see different things.
Well, I've witnessed that as somebody who's had boys and Welsh title fights and come out on the wrong end. Obviously, like what you're doing.
Well, yeah, we won't go down that rabbit hole again, Richard. That's another podcast for me, another 2-3 hours spare. But
I mean, as far as it goes, I mean, I'm really looking forward to the new era when we come out of COVID. And I've been speaking with Mo prior, and we're already taking steps towards, perhaps doing some shows in Wales. I mean, the amount of guys that, want to turn over now as well. I mean, next week I'm probably going to be releasing some information on Twitter in relation to some signings that have just re-signed, some new signings, and, a couple of guys in particular I'm very excited about. One of them trains at Enzo Macronelli's gym, and Enzo's got really high hopes for him. And, I mean, myself and Enzo have a lot of banter, but at the same time, he was one of, the best fighters to come out of Wales. And Bonamine Gym, to have him as a trainer, those kids, they are so blessed. It's unbelievable. And, I think over the next couple of years, you might see a few guys come out of that gym who've been under Enzo's pupillage. He is a fantastic trainer. He has very high standards. He makes very big demands of those kids. And because of the type of character he is, obviously he gets a great response from them. And I think we're going to see some great fighters coming out of Bonamine. And, I'm definitely going to be releasing news of signing one next week. And, the future for Welsh boxing is quite promising. We just got to get through these very difficult times. And, once we beat COVID as a community, then we can move forward, and perhaps, there'll be a lot for the Welsh public to look forward to.
Okay, on that positive note, Rich, thanks very much for your time this evening, and hope everyone enjoyed this conversation. I know I certainly have. Leave your comments, share it on social media or wherever you want to share it, and hopefully we'll catch up again, Rich, for another top 10 list or a debate about something or other. I'm sure we'll find something to argue about.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I have really enjoyed it. I'm really grateful to be a part of these little things that we do. I'm sure that quite a lot of people slaughter me for my opinion, but I think that there might be one or two out there as well who might, respect my opinion and be on the same page. Might even gain a bit of interest, historically, people looking at some of the historical figures. I mean, if you're going to be a part of the game, you should be a student of the game as well. And we've mentioned a lot of fighters there who've got some great highlight reels. Definitely worth checking out. YouTube is a fantastic opportunity for kids these days that were never around for the likes of us when we were younger. And I would urge all of them, if they got any interest in boxing, then they've got some great names there that they can research and learn a lot from.
Okay, cheers, Rich. All the best, mate. And I'll see you when I next see you.
Absolutely. All the best, Ciaran. Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Take
mate.
care.
Thanks, Rich. Ciao, mate.